The Republican tolerance, if not active support for Pumpkin Tits' ongoing bid to overturn the 2020 election has crystallized a stark question. Does the Republicans still qualify as a small Democratic Party, or is it morphing into something very totally different? Even with the Supreme Court still deciding whether to consider a last-ditch legal effort to invalidate the results from the key swing states, there appears little chance that Pumpkin Tits will succeed in subverting Joe Biden's victory. But the Orange Truck Weasel's failure on that front has obscured his success in enlisting a growing swath of his party to join his cause, a dynamic that is already prompting a new Republican efforts to make it more difficult to vote and raising concerns about the party's commitment to the basic tenets of Western democratic rules and conventions, including the peaceful transfer of power. Where their hearts are is hard to know, but their behavior is not democratic, said Susan Stokes, a political science professor and the director of the Chicago Center on Democracy at the University of Chicago, said. Stokes, like other experts, says the Republican Party is on a continuum toward the kind of democratic erosion visible to other countries, including Turkey under Erdogan, Hungary under Viktor Orban, or in the most extreme example, Russia under Vladimir Putin. In those nations, a party that wins office through a democratic election then seeks to use state power to tilt or completely undermine future elections. With one of our political parties trying to overturn the results of a free and fair election, we are way further down that road now than we were before the election a year ago, she said. Republicans have been going down that road all through Pumpkin Tits' term, but this is the parting gift, which is more extreme than what has happened before. Republicans' widespread enlistment in Pumpkin Tits' efforts follows years in which officials have advanced hundreds of state-level measures, making it more difficult to vote, and engaged in extraordinary legislative maneuvering to deny former President Barack Obama the opportunity to fill a vacant U.S. Supreme Court seat, and have either looked the other way or embedded the Orange Truck Weasel in a series of actions shredding democratic norms, including attempting to weaponize the Postal Service, tilt the results of the census, and pressure the Justice Department to investigate his opponents. Polling has consistently found that the majority of Republican voters believe that without evidence that the U.S. election was stolen, which it wasn't. One academic study based on a national survey conducted earlier this year found that a stunningly large share of self-identified Republicans endorsed anti-democratic propositions such as the traditional American way of life is disappearing so fast that we may have to use force to save it. The Republicans' behavior during this post-election period suggests that these are not abstract sentiments. The secretaries of state in Georgia and Arizona who rejected Pumpkin Tits' claims of fraud have faced death threats. A mob of armed protesters gathered last weekend outside the home of Michigan Secretary of State, who also stood by her state's results. Um, Joffrey Caba the director of political studies at the Libertarian Niskanen Center, said that he sees a fateful watershed in the party's post-election deference to Pumpkin Tits. Once the Republican Party got into this idea that voter suppression was the way to go, once it stopped believing it was the majority party and the entire American project was at stake, and Democrats would ruin the country if they hold power, which actually that's the Republicans that basically destroy everything. Um, then anything would be permitted, including anti-democratic means, said Caba Service, who is also the author of Rule and Ruin, a history of moderate Republicans. And this was all before Pumpkin Tits came to the scene, so Pumpkin Tits simply furthered what was there. The Republican Party, without acknowledging or realizing it has become an anti-democratic force, he said. Some key local Republican officials have conspicuously resisted Pumpkin Tits' pressure, including Doug Ducey and Brian Kemp, the Republican governors of Arizona and Georgia, respectively. In Michigan, the young Republican members of the state's canvassing board voted to uphold the state's results according to decisive Biden win there, and many Republican-appointed federal judges, as well as some elected at the state level, have joined in rejecting Pumpkin Tits' lawyers' unsubstantiated claims of the massive voter fraud. But as Caba Service notes, almost all of the elected Republican officials pushing back on Pumpkin Tits' claims are those responsible in some way for the election that he's impugning. In a sense, these people are being asked to say, "I'm complicit in a conspiracy," and none of them will do that, he said. More telling may be the growing number of elected Republicans who have endorsed Pumpkin Tits' attempts to disqualify the huge numbers of ballots and to have the Republican state legislators override the vote and send the pro-Pumpkin Tit electors to the Electoral College. And Wendy Weiser, the director of the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center for Justice, worries that Pumpkin Tits' string of illegal defeats has produced the public complacency about the magnitude of that movement in the past few weeks. Although nobody has been seriously concerned that Pumpkin Tits was going to succeed at accomplishing a coup and overturning the election results, she said, an alarming number of Republicans are willing to go along with this attempt to subvert democracy, and even more, there are many who are willing to enable it and participate actively in it. That list has steadily lengthened at the state and federal levels, though Republicans in the Pennsylvania state legislature concluded that they lacked the authority to override Biden's win there, so more than 60% of them, including the state House Speaker, signed a letter last week urging Congress to reject the state's results when lawmakers meet next year to certify the election. In Georgia, several Republican state senators circulated a petition asking the legislature to convene a special session to overturn the results. And in Arizona, the state GOP posted a tweet asking supporters if they're willing to die to overturn the election, and more than a dozen current or incoming Republican state legislators appeared at a Klan rally district to stop that steal. Another measure of state Republican support is the unusual lawsuit filed this week by the Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton asking the Supreme Court to throw out all the results in the four key states that Biden carried, which was Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Officials in all four states have already dismissed the suit's claims as inaccurate, but fully 17 other Republican-led states they had filed a brief with the Supreme Court supporting the case, as did lawyers for Pumpkin Tits. The Republican senators David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, both of whom face what they call general runoff elections that will determine control by the Senate, endorsed the lawsuit as well, even as Georgia's Republican Attorney General said it lacks merit. The Orange Truck Weasel called the same Attorney General this week to warn him against seeking to recruit other Republicans to oppose this litigation. In Congress, support for Pumpkin Tits has been largely tepid. Almost all Republicans have refused to acknowledge Biden's victory or to raise any objections, as Pumpkin Tits has unspooled the tangled conspiracy theories about the election and personally pressured state legislators to throw out their state's results. Senators Mitt Romney of Utah and Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania are among the rare exceptions who have condemned those tactics. Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio, one of Pumpkin Tits' most combative nutlickers, went even further this week, urging Pumpkin Tits not to concede the election, even after the Electoral College votes next week, and hinting that he would seek a floor debate when Congress meets to certify the outcome. More than 24 House Republicans this week sent Pumpkin Tits a letter urging the appointment of a special counsel to investigate so-called election fraud. Moscow Mitch and Kevin McCarthy, the Republican Senate and House leaders, respectively, this week voted against the measure, acknowledging Biden's win. From President-elect Joe Biden on down, Democrats have mostly downplayed the accumulating Republican support for Pumpkin Tits' machinations. Instead, they tried to deflate Pumpkin Tits by projecting certainly about Biden's eventual victory in the process, though hardly any Democratic leaders have raised full-scale alarms about the Orange Truck Weasel's maneuvers or tried to brand the Republicans supporting him as threats to the basic tenets of American democracy. The Representative David Cicilline of Rhode Island, who chairs the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, had said that he considers congressional Republican support for Pumpkin Tits' efforts horrific and dangerous. It's hard to believe that people who take an oath to support and defend the Constitution would engage in an effort to support a squatter who is undermining our Constitution, our democracy, and the rule of law, and refusing to accept the decision of the voters, he said. But Cicilline added that Democrats are balancing that conviction against the desire to focus on the Biden administration transition and a reluctance to give Pumpkin Tits' claims more oxygen. On the one hand, you don't want to take it lightly or ignore the damage it's going to cause. On the other hand, you don't want to give them a platform to promote this completely made-up idea. Yet, one consequence of that choice is that Republicans appear to feel no political danger from supporting Pumpkin Tits. As often in the case of the Republicans, the Republican office holders appear more concerned about provoking a backlash from the right if they don't support Pumpkin Tits, and then push back from the center or left if they do. One measure of a Republican pressure, fresh calls from state and federal Republicans for a new wave of laws make it more difficult to vote. Republican Senator Rick Scott of Florida and Representative Dan Crenshaw of Texas want a national law imposing the kind of strict voter ID requirements that conservative states have passed over roughly the past decade, and that civil rights groups argue disproportionately disenfranchised majority and low-income voters. Republican state legislators in Texas have already unveiled an assortment of new proposals that could make it harder to vote. After Democrats markedly increased their total vote in the state this year, most dramatic, the Republican majority in the Georgia State Senate announced this week that it would try next year to ban ballot drop boxes, repeal the state's long-standing law allowing any voter to request a mail-in ballot for any reason and require voter ID for all remaining mail ballots. The Georgia Senate Republicans have heard the calls of millions of Georgians who have raised deep and heartfelt concerns that state law has been violated and our elections process abused. The majority insisted in a statement that Georgia's Republican Secretary of State has repeatedly said that there's no evidence of widespread fraud in the November election, from mail ballots or anything otherwise. Ness Ufut, the chief executive officer of the voter registration and mobilization group New Georgia Project, had said that the proposals represent a transparent effort by Republicans to suppress turnout in a state electorally involving any of them. After an election that saw unprecedented participation from both sides, the Republican legislators' reaction is to say that worked too well. Let's construct additional hurdles to participation. It's ridiculous, she said, but desperate people do desperate things in the marketplace of ideals. Young people and the majority of Georgians are not buying what they are selling, and in order for them to hold on to power, they have to cheat. Yeah, that's what the Republicans do, right? Dan Pfeiffer, a Democratic strategist and former White House communications director for Obama, says that Pumpkin Tits' success at convincing so many GOP voters that the election was stolen will only increase pressure on the Republican elected officials to participate if a future nominee, whether Pumpkin Tits or someone else, tries to overturn another vote. To Pfeiffer, it's native to expect that the party will reverse its anti-democratic trajectory once Pumpkin Tits leaves office. If anything, the pace could accelerate if Pumpkin Tits brands the GOP officials who resisted him as Republicans in the name only, rhinos, and successfully backs primary challenges against some of them in 2022. This is the end of the beginning, and this is the end of the beginning, but not the beginning of the end, Pfeiffer said. And elections going forward, not trying to steal the election will be seen as rhino behavior, and that's the danger of this. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, Ryan Van Mike, and also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out, and thanks for listening.